Today we're going to be learning Ketubot Daf Mem Tet. Today's daf is sponsored by Gita and David Neufeld in loving memory of Harleen Appelman, Chaya Bat Osna Rachel Vishmuel, who passed away on August 18th. Tenacious warrior who overcame all challenges, Harleen lived her life with dignity, grace, and love. She was a passionate advocate for Jewish education and identity. Not only was she our mentor, but she was our beloved friend. Yehi Zichra Baruch. Today's daf is sponsored by Sarah Barelowitz. May our learning today be in memory of my beautiful mom, Kila Bat Yehuda, who passed away 9 years ago on the 24th of Av. As the time passes, I miss her more and more. Okay, we're going to be starting today at the very top of our daf. According to Rashi, this actually starts a new section, a new question. Bit of a debate about what this line is, but we're going to go with Rashi. Should we say that, let's say this woman, remember we were talking about a woman who goes from, she's taken from her father to the messengers of her husband, or from messengers of the father to the messengers of the husband. She's kind of given over to the husband, even though she's not yet married. So what if she goes back to her father's house before the marriage? First, she gets given over to them. Then she goes back for some reason to her father's house, and she's not yet married. So, Hadran Milta Kamaita, did she go back to her original state or not? Remember, it depends what this is all for Yerusha, for Truma, right? All sorts of things. So what's the situation? Amarava. Oh, not really a question. Rabbi Ishmael's, and from his school of learning, there's already a braita that explains to us the answer to this question. Titana debei Rabbi Ishmael. Here comes the braita. V'neder almanal grusha. This is a pasuk quoting from the verse. The neder, the vow of a widow or a divorcee, kol asher asra al nafsha, anything she forbids to herself. Yakum aleha will stand. Why will it stand? Because she doesn't have a husband or a father to undo it, because she's not in anyone's domain anymore. Now, this is pretty obvious. V'halo matam ulamal. Why do you need the pasuk? This is the braita. The braita says, why do you need that pasuk? She's not in the father's domain and she's not in the husband's domain anymore. It must be talking about our case where she was turned over from the father to the messengers of the husband, or from the messengers of the father to the messengers of the husband, and she was widowed or divorced on the way. That's, what is she? Is she part of her father's household? Is she part of the husband's household? From here we learn that once she leaves for one moment or 1 hour, really usually it's 1 moment, from the father's domain, she never goes back. Okay, and that's what it means. We're talking about not a standard case of almana or grusha, but particularly this case where she wasn't in fact fully married yet. She was just passed over to them. Even if she went back or didn't go back, it doesn't matter. She can't go back anymore. It's like we call the point of no return. So now we're going to have 2 people who bring proofs from Mishnahs for this halacha. Amarav Papa, Afana Nami Tanina. We actually learned this in a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Haba al Nara Murasa. We learned that you get stoned if it's an adulterous relationship with a woman who is betrothed, right? But not if she's married. You need 4 criteria. She needs to be an na'ara, right? That in between stage. She needs to be a betula, a virgin. She needs to be murasa, betrothed, and she needs to be hi bebeit avia, in her father's household. So now the Gemara says, and they're going to darshan. Usually this is going to sound like drasha we had on the words in the psukim. We talked about na'ara, murasa, betula. But they're clearly not darshaning the pasuk, because in those psukim we've been darshaning, they don't have the words beit avia. And here they seem to be darshaning the words in the Mishnah. Now they say, the Mishnah says na'ara, so bishlama, we understand na'ara, that's to tell us na'ara v'lo bogeret, once she's beyond 12 and 6 months, right, or the 6 months pass when she becomes 12 and has 2 pubic hairs. We basically say, once she's a bogeret, there's no law of na'ara murasa. Again, what will happen? They'll get strangulation and not stoned. Bitula v'lo be'ula, so bitula means virgin, not if she already had relations with someone before that. Murasa v'lo nesua, betrothed but not married. Beit Avia. Why does the Mishnah say Beit Avia? Obviously, if she's married, she's out of Beit Avia, all that. So, Beit Avia l'mi'ute, what does that come to exclude? Lav l'mi'ute, is it not to exclude specifically our case? Masach ha'av l'shluchei habal. And then once the father passes her to shluchei habal, doesn't matter what happens after that, that's it. She's out of his domain, and then she wouldn't get stoned anymore. So that must be what it's coming to teach us, which means we can derive the same halacha from our Mishnah. Not our Mishnah here, but a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Same kind of idea. Amarav Nachman bar Yitzchak Afan Anami Tanina. We also have this in the Mishnah. Haba al Eshet Ish, one who has relations, right? This is a Mishnah in Sanhedrin also. Once someone who sleeps with a married woman, Kevan shenechnesa l'reshut habal l'nisuin, af al pi shelo nivala. Instead of saying who gets stoned, now they're saying who gets strangulation. It's a man who sleeps with a married woman. Since she entered the domain of her husband, the nisuin, right, for the purposes of marriage, even though she hasn't actually had relations with him, then she gets stoned. She gets strangulation and not stoned. So what do you see here? Sounds like just going into his domain without even a marriage. Sounds like exactly our case. When she gets passed over to the husband's domain, already she's going to get strangulation. She's out of the realm of being betrothed. Again, it means she's already left her father's household. So we have basically, until now, all we've done is we had a question, we had an answer, and then we proved the answer we strengthened it by saying there's two Mishnayot that prove this as well. New Mishnah. Ha'av eino chayav b'mizonot bito. The father is not commanded to sustain his daughter, to give her food. Okay, we've learned this before. We talked about how from age 6, he doesn't have to give her food anymore. So from 6 and up, okay, to age 12, obviously beyond 12, she's a Bulgarian. He's not supposed to feed her before that. He certainly doesn't have to feed her after that. We're talking about specifically when he's alive. When he dies, then he actually is required to. And we're going to talk about that soon. That is part of it's actually stipulated in the Ketubot. Okay, we're going to talk about 2 stipulations in the Ketubot in one more second. So the father doesn't have to feed his daughter when he's alive. Again, we talked about how most fathers do anyway, but he's not required to. He's not obligated. The Gemara is going to darshan a few things from this Mishnah, and we'll get to that soon. And notice it doesn't mention sons. We'll talk about that soon. Because actually, under 6, sons and daughters both are supposed to be sustained by the father. Beyond that age, we'll see what the deal is. This is something Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah darshaned. He learned this out. The fact that a father is not obligated to feed his daughters when he's alive is something that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah darshaned out. Rashi says when? On the day, the Yom Sheminuhu Nasi, the day they made him the Nasi. Okay, that's the famous machloket between, the whole thing that happened with Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua in Masechet Brachot, Daf Kav Zayin, Kav Chet, where it talked about that whole story where he embarrasses Rabbi Yeshua, and in the end they bring a new leader, and that was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. On that day he darshaned this in Keren B'Yavne. Keren B'Yavne is a reference to the Sanhedrin when it moved to Yavne, because the rabbis went in lines, Rashi says, like in a vineyard. There's a bunch of different other explanations as to why it's called Keren B'Yavne, not for today. Anyway, what did he darshan? Habanim yirshu v'habanot yizonu. Since in the Ketubah, 2 of the conditions, stipulations in the Ketubah are, the rabbis instituted this. One is Ketubah banim dichrin, which means the Ketubah for banim zcharin, for male children, male sons, which is the wife, okay, remember, the husband inherits the wife's ketubah if she dies. If he dies, she gets it, or he divorces her, she gets it. But if she dies first, he gets it. Now, what's the problem? If he dies, her ketubah goes to his sons. That's okay. But what if his sons are not her sons, right? Let's say she has some sons with him, and he has sons with some other women. She doesn't want her ketubah, which includes, by the way, things that she brought into the marriage, going to other children of his that aren't hers. So in the ketubah, one of the things that the courts instituted is that her sons get her stuff. Her ketubah, which the husband inherits, if he dies, that all goes to her children only, her sons, not to his sons from other wives. The second thing is banot yizonu. This is what we talked about, that the daughters, when he dies, get mizonot. So here comes the drashan. This is how Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah got to the fact that he doesn't have to feed his daughters when he's alive. Because he said the following. Since it says in the Ketubot, these two things, and they're juxtaposed, the banim inherit and the daughters get sustained, maha banim enam yorshim ela la'achar mitat ha'av, just like the sons only inherit once the father dies, there's no such thing as inheritance before he dies, av habanot ein nizonot ela la'achar mitat avihen. Likewise, the daughters, when they get sustained and he has to feed them, that's only after he dies. And that's why he's not obligated when they're alive, when he's alive. So now the Gemara wants to infer two things from this Mishnah, and that's going to create problems. Number one, b'mizonot bitohu deino chayav. Notice we talked about this, it only said girls. What about boys, sons? So it must be, it must be he's obligated to feed his sons. Okay? So he's not obligated to feed his daughters, but he is obligated to feed his sons. Bito nami. Chovau deleka hamitzveika. And not only that, but the daughter, it might not be, he's not obligated according to the Mishnah, but the fact that he uses the language he's not obligated, and he doesn't say he's exempt, so it must be that it's a mitzvah. There's different terms used. There's chovah means you must. Mitzvah means it's a good thing. This is how we use it often in our jargon. We say, oh, it's a mitzvah. It's a good thing to do, right? So that's what that means here. It's not a chovah. It's not obligatory, but it is recommended, okay? So if that's the case, if number one, we're going to assume you're not obligated for girls, but you are for boys. And number two, you're going to assume you might not be obligated for girls, but it is a mitzvah. That's going to create a problem. Mani matnitin. Lo Rabbi Meir, lo Rabbi Yehuda, lo Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka. Our Mishnah now doesn't match any of the three opinions we know about the subject. How so? D'Tanya, as it says in a Braita. First opinion, Rabbi Meir. Mitzvah lazun et habanot. Okay, that so far works. It's a mitzvah to feed your daughters. Kal v'chomer labanim, and all the more so to your sons. But again, all the more so to your sons means it's only a mitzvah. It's not an obligation. Why more so to your sons? Because your sons are learning Torah and they can't afford to support themselves. So it's more, right? It's very important that you let your sons learn so that, right? So you feed them so that they can learn. Less so your daughters because they're not really learning Torah, because in those days, girls didn't learn Torah, right? You might say, maybe today this would be different and maybe the same because they both learn Torah. Anyway, or maybe you'd still say maybe there's a difference between his obligation and her obligation. Anyway, I'm not going to start getting into that one. But in any case, in those days, it makes a lot more sense that the sons, it would be all the more so because, again, if you accept this argument that that's a relevant factor here, because they're learning Torah, so we need to enable them to learn, and therefore he needs to feed them all the more so. That's Divrei Rabbi Meir. So it doesn't match because according to this, both, again, assuming you accept the inference, which is girls, it's a mitzvah, but boys, it's obligatory. Here it seems to say for both, it's just a mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mitzvah lazunit habanim. He starts off with the boys and not the girls. It's a mitzvah for the boys to feed them. Kal v'chomer labanot. He does the reverse. He says, well, the more so for girls. If you're going to feed your boys and it's a mitzvah, it's a good thing to do. Well, the more so, it's going to be a good thing to feed your girls. Why? Because mishum ziluta. We talked about this the other day. You don't want your daughters walking around knocking on doors. It's an embarrassment. It's much worse for girls to do that than it is for boys. Again, I don't know why, right? But in their society, it was more embarrassing for girls to have to go around. Maybe also because girls generally didn't go out knocking on people's doors. They were more in the home. They were more sheltered. I don't know, but it's more of an embarrassment. In any case, so that's why all the more so, it's a mitzvah to feed your girls. So again, in the end, he's basically saying the same thing as Rabbi Meir, again, for our purposes. Maybe there's a difference between them, but the main idea here is for both of them, it's a mitzvah. And it's not obligatory for the boys, which is what we thought the Mishnah was saying. Number 3 opinion, Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka Omer, Chova lazunit habanot la'achal mitat avihen. After the father dies, that so far matches our Mishnah, it's obligatory. Aval b'chayei avihem, but when their father's alive, Elu va'elu, both the boys and the girls, einan nizonim. Nobody gets sustained, not even a mitzvah. According to him, Boys and girls are the same. First of all, notice everybody thought boys and girls were the same here, and nobody thinks it's right. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka thinks that nobody, it's even a mitzvah. It's nothing, not a mitzvah, not an obligation. So that clearly doesn't match our Mishnah. To which the Gemara says, and now we're going to spell out everything that I just told you, which is mani matnitin. Who's the Mishnah like? Rabbi Meir hamar bani mitzvah. He said banim it's a mitzvah. And we thought our Mishnah held banim it's obligatory. Rabbi Yehuda hamar banim nami mitzvah. He said banim it's also a mitzvah, meaning obviously the girls, right, and even the boys. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka filu mitzvah nami leka. And according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, it's not even a mitzvah, right? Not for boys and not for girls, so doesn't match. To which the Gemara says, I'm going to explain it now. Each opinion can work with our Mishnah. How so? We're going to read our Mishnah a little differently than we thought. We're basically going to say what we inferred before, daughter, but not sons, meaning daughter, it's a mitzvah, but sons, it would be obligatory. That's not true. It says daughter only. We're going to have to explain why does it say daughter only, but not to say not sons. It's to say daughter, and sons are like daughters. This is how you read it. Right? I'm just repeating. The father's not obligated to feed the daughter, and also not for the son. Ha-mitzvah bibito ika, and yet it is a mitzvah. So far, that's the inference we made before for the girls. And kavachomer labanim. Now, this matches exactly what Rabbi Meir said, because it's kavachomer labanim, it's a mitzvah, because of their learning Torah. Behind the katani bito. So then why does it say only the daughter if it meant daughters and sons? Hakamashmalan, they wanted you to know, to afilu bito, that even the daughters, even though the daughters aren't learning Torah, and you might have thought you don't really need to sustain them, well, chovau deleka but ha mitzvah ika. It's still a mitzvah to do. Okay, and therefore they want to teach you, even for the girls, it's still a mitzvah. Let's explain according to Rabbi Yehuda. The father's not obligated to feed the son, to feed the daughters, and all the more so the sons. Okay, now, because we're not obligated to feed the sons either. Ha mitzvah b'beno ika, v'kavachomer labanot. From there you see, okay, it's not obligated to feed the daughters and also not the sons. However, it is a mitzvah for the sons, and all the more so, kavachomer, it's a mitzvah for the daughters. Why is it kavachomer a mitzvah for the daughters? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, we don't want them embarrassing themselves on the street. So it is a mitzvah. It is a good thing to do, even though it's not obligatory. Again, you're going to have to explain, well, then why did it only say daughters if it meant daughters and sons? It's to teach you that even the daughters, there's no obligation. Okay? Meaning, because you might have thought, because you don't want the daughters knocking on doors and humiliating themselves, maybe you're obligated. It mentioned daughters to teach you you're not obligated. So again, the stress, according to Rabbi Meir, on the daughters was there's even a mitzvah to feed them, even though you would have thought maybe not. And this one is saying there's no obligation, even though you maybe would have thought yes. Now remember, what was the problem with him? He seemed to say there's no obligation whatsoever, not even a mitzvah. And we thought that when it said you're not obligated, it meant, but there is a mitzvah. So now we're going to say, this is how you read the Mishnah. It's the same boys and girls. Again, we'd always have to say that because all of them equated boys and girls. And not only that, it's not even a mitzvah. Why did they use the language of chova? Why did they talk about they're not obligated, which we thought meant, but there is a mitzvah? They used the language of obligated. And why did they speak only about daughters? Because since after the father dies, you're actually obligated to feed the girls. What they were saying here is you're not obligated during his lifetime. And so not obligated that it's not even a mitzvah. Okay, so those are three different ways to understand the Mishnah. So the second part of today's daf was basically explaining the Mishnah. And first, we inferred two things. In the end, we say we don't necessarily infer both those things. First inference, nobody infers, which is girls, yes, boys are different, right? Boys, it's an obligation. Nobody felt that way. And in the end, and the second one, which is that the daughter, we wanted to say it's not obligatory, but it is a mitzvah. So that we explain both according to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, but according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, even that inference we don't hold by. Amar Rabbi Ila, Amar Rish Lakish, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina. Okay, pay attention. It's Rabbi Ila who passed it down the name of Rish Lakish, who passed it down the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Chanina. We're going to need this tomorrow, so keep this in your head. Be'usha hitkinu. In Usha, we talked before about Keren B'Yavne, which is one of the places Sanhedrin went to. Another place the Sanhedrin ends up being is in Usha. And in Usha, they institute the following things. We're going to learn now about a bunch of, starting today and moving into tomorrow, a bunch of takanot that they instituted in Usha. And then the Gemara is going to ask about each of them. Well, is that the halacha? In fact, what we're going to see today is that the two that we're going to see today, in fact, were not accepted la halacha, which is interesting in and of itself. Why, when the rabbis instituted this takana in Usha, why did it not become accepted? Okay, the Gemara is not going to relate to that issue, but I want you to think about it. It's a very interesting concept that the rabbis instituted something in Usha and then it just ends up not really being accepted. So he says the following thing. In Usha Hitkinu, they established Sheyehe Adam Zan et Banav et Benotav Kshem Ktanim. So against the basic halacha, that you don't have to, they instituted that you have to. Tanim doesn't mean 0 to 6. So we said that everyone agrees yes. But what they meant is up to age 12 or 13. So then they asked, Hilchata kavate, or ain hilchata kavate? Is this the halacha or not? You can imagine, by the way, it must have been that parents weren't, right? Fathers weren't feeding their children. And because of that, they made an institute, a takana. You have to do this. Right, again, we talked about the other day that it just seems like it was natural and this happened naturally. Maybe you don't need a law about it, but maybe there was a situation where people weren't feeding their children and they instituted, you have to do this. So they now say, is this the halacha or not? Tashma, they're going to bring a bunch of scenarios and things the rabbis did that it's going to be very clear that in the end, this takana was not accepted because we're going to have situations where the fathers are not supporting their children and the rabbis try everything they can, kind of like when you have a get that you force the husband to give the get, you twist his arm in order to get him to do it. So likewise here, they're trying to force him to do it, but they can't force him by law. So they're just trying other mechanisms in order to get him to do this, other tactics. So let's see. Tashma, they came before Rav Yehuda, someone who wasn't feeding their children. Amar lehu, he said to them, Yarud yalda v'abnei mata shadya. A jackal has children and yet sends them to the city to get fed. Okay, meaning you're acting like a jackal. You're not feeding your children. What kind of craziness is this? Okay, some people explain it differently, that it's the opposite, which is even a jackal feeds its young, and this person is sending his children to the city to feed them. What kind of craziness? You're not even, right? You're not even doing what animals do. So that's number one. So again, it's a way of humiliating him to basically say, wake up and smell the coffee. You know, what are you doing here? Next story. When they came before Rav Chisda, Amar lahu, he said to them, Kafu lahu asita b'tzibura, turn over the millstone in public. Why they did this, I'll give you two out of many different explanations because nobody really understands why. One is to basically, well, maybe I'll give you three. One is to make a pedestal, so turn over the millstone, and then you're going to see, he's going to say, and stand on it and say the following thing. Number two, so again, they wanted to make a public spectacle of this. Number two is turning it over to show symbolically that things are hafuch halafuch, as we say, everything's upside down, that a father's not feeding his children. Some people say they turned it over to kind of curse the father, like your life is going to be overturned because of what you're doing. Okay, so anyway, he says, turn over the millstone, the leikum velema, and get up and say, or babai bane, and a raven wants his sons, ba'u gavra lo bai bane, but this guy doesn't want his sons. Again, the same type of idea of, a raven, it takes care of its young, but you're not. Or babai bane, wait a minute. A raven takes care of its children? The haktiv, doesn't it say, I'll tell you the beginning of the pasuk, you say it in davening, in Pesukei Zimra every day, noten lebehema lachma, God gives the animals food, bread, And to the sons of the raven who call out to God. Why are they calling out to God? Because their parents, right, whoever gave birth to them, right, are not feeding them. So basically, it sounds like the raven does not feed its young. So the Gemara answers, Lo kasha. One way to explain this is, right, it's white and black, that there's different types of ravens. Okay, some people say it's different stages in the life of a raven, or it's different types of raven. White ravens don't feed their young, black ravens do feed their young, and that resolves the contradiction. Either which way, you see that they had to make a spectacle of this because the father wasn't doing it and they have really no way to enforce it. Number 3, story. Said to the father, are you comfortable with the fact that your children are living off of charity and you're not feeding them? By the way, the fact that, the Gemara is saying, by the way, that the fact that all this we said, you can't enforce the father, you can't force him to feed his children, is ela de lo amid. It's only when he doesn't have a lot of money. Now, where you draw the line is a very good question. I have a good answer for that question. Aval amid, but if he's wealthy, kafina leal korcha, you can actually force him. Why? On what basis? Because he forced, okay, there was a case where Rava forced Rav Nata Bar Ami to give 400 zuzim. That's a lot of money to charity because he could afford it. There was a need in the city and they forced people to give charity who had the means to help. So there's a way to enforce charity. If there's a way to enforce charity, of course you can enforce the father giving food to his children instead of trying to get charity from other people in the city, assuming he has wealth and he can afford it. So again, where you draw the line and what you call someone has wealth or doesn't have wealth, right? How we can try to enforce him to feed his children if he doesn't even have enough food to feed himself, right? It's a good question. But right, obviously there's something in between there, which is, you don't have a ton of money, but you have some money, and right, then we can't enforce it maybe, but once you have a lot of money, then we can enforce it. So Amar Rabbi Yila, Amar Rish Lakish. The second statement of Rabbi Yila, instead of being in the name of Rish Lakish in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bar Chanina, it's just in the name of Rish Lakish, but Rabbi Yila again says again, Be'ushe Itkinu, another takana, not really related, but does have to do with children. Hakotev kol nechasav lebanav. If a man during his lifetime says, I'm giving my children all my money right now, not when I die, right now. So now he's got no money left to eat with. So huvi ishto nizonim mehem. He and his wife can take from their money, right? The money they basically gave to their children. They can eat off of it. In other words, they can demand the children give them food. So more than this, they said, the widow can feed off of the money of the husband, and therefore, in other words, when he dies and the inheritance goes off to his children, and we're going to talk about exactly what situation they're referring to. So the wife can get fed from the possessions. So of course, when he's alive, even if he gave away everything to his children, of course, he and the wife can eat. If the wife herself can eat off of his money, once he's dead and it goes all to the children, of course, he and his wife can eat in their lifetime. So why would you even need to make a takana for this? To which the Gemara is going to explain where the question really comes from. Okay, this attack of Rabbi Zera. Deshalach Ravin Beigarte, he sent a letter. Mishamet v'iniach almana ubat. We're going to get to a more particular situation where the almana eats. If he left over a widow and a daughter, so the daughter inherits. Okay, now almana nizona min chasav. That's a very simple case. So the almana obviously gets money because again she's promised food in the ketubah. So when the daughter inherits, she can take it from the daughter. But gets a little more complicated. Nisei tabat. What if she gets married? Now, if she gets married, her husband has rights to her stuff. Now, I'll give you a different case before we even go on to this. If an almana takes food, okay, from the Yerusha, let's say it's sons who inherit, if they sell the property, she can no longer take food from there. If they have nothing left, okay, and they've given all the property away, they've sold it to other people, then she doesn't get any food, okay? She has no one to demand food from. She can still get the ketubah from people who, like, let's say they sell all the property. She can demand the ketubah from it, which is the one lump sum, but the monthly payments of mezonot, remember, the woman can claim mezonot until she claims her ketubah. Once she claims her ketubah, she doesn't get mezonot anymore. She gets that one big lump sum, but which is usually about food for a year, but the basic ketubah. But if they sell it to a buyer, she has no rights to get mizonot from those buyers. So the husband of this daughter, when the daughter inherits from the father and the husband basically gets rights to her possessions, he's kind of like a buyer. And yet, what does it say here? That even though he's like a buyer and theoretically she shouldn't get mizonot, even if the daughter's married, almanatoni zona min chasab, she still can get money from the possessions. So even though he really is like a buyer, for this purpose, he's not treated like a buyer. She still can claim money, rights to the money, right, to get food. Metabat, even if the daughter dies, Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Achotosh Rabbi Yossi ben Bar Chanina, okay, the son of the daughter of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, this Rabbi Yehuda, this is which Rabbi Yehuda is he, whatever, that's not important for us right now. Al Yadi Hayama said there was a case like this, and even though the daughter had died, the widow was still able to get the money from the husband. So, if we give so many rights to this widow, of course we're going to give rights to this man and his wife. When he gave up, also you have to think about, what was he thinking? When he was giving all of his possessions to his sons, he obviously wasn't thinking, well, I'm going to go and knock on people's doors and beg for charity, right? Obviously he meant, well, I'm still going to take the basics that I need, but anything beyond my basics are yours. So therefore, Rabbi Zera says, I don't even understand how you can ask this question. Because of course, if you can't, and what's similar, by the way, about the sons and this husband, even though the husband's treated like a buyer, and normally she wouldn't be able to collect from the buyer, but both of them received it as a gift, right? It wasn't something they bought, actually. So it makes sense that in this case, right, we can demand mizonot from there. So why would you even need to tell us, right? It seems totally unnecessary that the husband and his wife can collect money from the family. Of course they can. To which the Gemara explains, you're comparing a widow to a wife and her husband. A widow, we're always much more worried about because she can't necessarily work for herself. Okay, she can't necessarily make ends meet. She's got other things to do for the household. She can't necessarily go out and work. So therefore, when it's the almanah, we're worried about her more. We're going to let her claim more things. When it's he and her and they're left, they gave all their possessions to their sons. Maybe we'd say in that case, go work. He'll work. He'll work for him and her, and he'll make enough food, make enough money for them to survive. And he really did mean to give the children all the nechasim, right? All the money. That's why they come to tell you, no, it's not in fact the case. And that's what they were metaken in Usha. He said, if somebody writes all of his property to his sons, he can still claim food for him and his wife. To which the Gemara wants to know again, do we hold like this or do we not hold like this? Tashma, let's learn from here. To Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yonatan Avu Kaimeh, they were standing there. A guy comes, bends down, kisses Rabbi Yochanan on the feet. Amale Rabbi Chanina, my high. Rabbi Chanina says, what's going on? Why is he kissing the ground you walk on? Amarle, kotev nechasav lebanavu. Oh, this guy, he was a guy who wrote all of his possessions to his sons. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit into tomorrow's stuff because we're kind of mid-sentence. Va'asitinu lizane. And I forced the children to feed the father. If you say this wasn't the law, okay, now the Gemara comes in and says, we're going to learn from here whether we hold like Usha or not. If you say this wasn't the law, meaning they didn't accept the Takana and Usha, Mishum hachi asitinu. What does asitinu mean? It's like a get muse. It's a get where we force him, we twist his arm, we try everything we can. But we don't enforce it like a normal law because it's not a normal law. So meaning, if you say it wasn't the law of Usha was not, the Takana of Usha was not accepted. That's where Rabbi Yonatan had to basically go out of his way to do what he could to force the sons to feed the father. And that's why the father was so appreciative, because he was able to get that done. But if you say this is the law, asitinu bai, then you don't need to force him, coerce him, right? Then you just say, this is the law, pay up. So it must be that we don't hold like Usha. So we now have two examples where Usha instituted a takana, and right, to help either the children in the first case to get sustenance, and in this case for the father to get sustenance in the strange case where he basically writes all his possessions to his sons. And yet we see from the fact that they had to try all sorts of tactics to get the children or the father to do what they were supposed to do, proves that we must not have accepted the takana of Usha. So I'm leaving you with this question of very interesting that they instituted this takana and yet it wasn't accepted. I'm going to leave with you as some food for thought, and we'll continue with takanat Usha in tomorrow's daf. Wishing everyone a great day.